Hello friends, watch my story and don't forget to subscribe. They took my kindness for weakness, but every story here proves revenge doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. I always thought a father's love was enough to shape a child into a good man. I believed that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed deep enough, and loved fiercely enough, my son would grow into someone who cherished me the way I cherished him. But I was wrong. Love, I learned far too late, has no guarantee. And sacrifice can turn invisible in the eyes of someone who never had to make any. When my wife died, my son was only 8 years old. The night we buried her, he clung to my shirt and cried until his small body trembled with exhaustion. In that moment, I made a promise, a vow carved into the rawest part of my soul, that I would never let him feel the emptiness he felt that night again. I thought I could fill the void she left behind by being enough for the both of us. Mother and father, provider and protector, comfort and strength. I didn't realize that in trying to fill that void, I would slowly carve out pieces of myself. Life demanded more of me than I had ever been prepared for. But I gave everything it asked. I worked mornings as a janitor, scrubbing floors while the world was still half asleep. I worked evenings in a warehouse, lifting boxes heavier than my own exhaustion. And on weekends, I fixed whatever the neighborhood needed fixed: broken doors, leaky taps, cracked tiles, anything that brought a little more money home. I went without new clothes for years. My shoes had holes in the soles, but I didn't care. What mattered was that he had new shoes every school year, crisp uniforms, and whatever books his teachers said he needed. If the money ran short, I skipped meals. If he wanted seconds at dinner, I pretended I wasn't hungry. Every birthday, I made him a cake. Some years I had barely enough ingredients, but I still found a way. Flour stretched with crushed biscuits, cream made from leftover milk and sugar. But when he smiled at that cake, every ache in my body felt worth it. When he wanted to play sports, I worked extra shifts to buy his gear. When he struggled with homework, I stayed up late beside him, even after 12 hours of hard labor. There were nights I could barely keep my eyes open while he read his books, but I refused to fail him. I refused to let him feel alone. Years passed, and he grew into a young man. I thought all the sacrifices were building a foundation he would one day stand on proudly. I paid for his college, so he wouldn't carry the burden of debt I once carried. I worked double shifts to make sure every tuition bill was paid on time. I never told him how many nights I cleaned office buildings while he studied in warm classrooms. I never showed him the cuts on my hands from warehouse crates. I never mentioned the cold water in the mop bucket numbing my fingers. I wanted him to feel safe, protected, free. I thought that would make him love me more. But I was wrong again. He graduated, got married, and I wanted him to start his life without worry. So I gave him the greatest gift I had, the house I spent decades paying for. Every brick, every nail, every corner of that house had a piece of my life in it. When I handed him the keys on his wedding day, he looked happy, proud even. I told him the house was his now, so he'd always have a place to live. What I didn't tell him was that the deed was still in my name. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I never imagined I would ever need to protect myself from my own child. That thought would come much later. Too late. I moved into one of the smaller bedrooms, so he and his wife could have the main part of the house. I cooked for myself, cleaned my own room, stayed out of their way. I didn't want to interfere in their marriage. I didn't want to be the father-in-law who hovered over their life. But slowly, quietly, things began to change. The gratitude in his eyes faded. The warmth in his voice cooled. The distance crept in like fog, barely noticeable at first, but heavy enough to suffocate me over time. He began making small comments about the way I lived. The TV was too loud. I bought too much milk. I used too many lights. The hot water bill was high. I told myself he was stressed from work. That marriage was new, and adjustments always bring tension. I excused each comment the way a father excuses a child's tantrum. But it didn't stop. Soon, the way he looked at me shifted, slowly, painfully, from respect to irritation. He avoided sitting with me. His wife barely spoke to me. They whispered behind closed doors and fell silent the moment I walked in. I pretended not to notice. I kept reminding myself, he is my son, He will come around. But the truth was, he wasn't coming around. He was moving farther away. Maybe the problem was that I made life too easy for him. He never knew what hunger felt like, what exhaustion tasted like, what it was like to fight the world alone. Maybe I protected him so much he never learned the weight of responsibility. Maybe he didn't value what he never had to earn. One afternoon, I was fixing the garden fence, something I'd always done. He walked outside and saw me working. Instead of saying thank you, he said, "Why are you making noise right now?" "I'm trying to relax." His irritation cut deeper than any blade. The man I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for saw me not as a father, but as a disturbance. I laughed it off, but inside something tightened. Something fragile cracked just a little. Still, I held on to the hope that blood was stronger than frustration, that he would remember the man who carried him when he was too tired to walk, the man who stayed up late helping with homework, the man who handed him a house without asking for anything in return. But hope can be blinding. I didn't see how fast he was slipping away from me. I didn't see how far the disrespect would go. I didn't see the cruelty he was growing capable of. Not until the night he locked me away. But before that final breaking point, the signs were all around me. He started controlling things in the house, turning down the water heater so my showers stayed barely warm, switching off hallway lights even when I needed them, commenting on how I folded laundry as if I were a child. He made rules, small humiliations wrapped as household preferences. And the worst part wasn't the rules. It was the tone. Sharp, cold, belittling. His wife encouraged it. I could hear the two of them whispering about me behind kitchen walls, treating me like an uninvited guest in the home I bought. Still, I tried. I washed dishes before they came home. I mowed the lawn early, so weekends would be peaceful. I fixed things around the house without being asked. But the more I tried, the more they pushed me away. My presence became something they tolerated. Not appreciated, not respected, just tolerated, barely. It's a unique kind of loneliness, sitting in a home you built and feeling like a stranger in every room. Nights became long. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. I had never spoken to my father with anything less than respect. I had never made my father feel small. But here I was, reduced to an inconvenience in my own home. Then I heard him one evening, speaking to his wife. "Once he's out, we can finally renovate. We'll have space. Once he's out, not once he moves, not once he's comfortable, but once he's out," as if I were a stain, a burden, something to remove. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my chest like the beating of a cruel drum. I felt the shift, something dangerous, something irreversible, building inside him. And I was right to sense it, because the next time he lost his temper, he didn't raise his voice. He raised the lock, and he used it on me. He locked me away, like a prisoner, like an unwanted animal, like a father he had long stopped loving. That was the night everything changed. And that was the night I began to understand that sometimes the child you raise with love can grow into the very thing that breaks you. But he didn't break me. He awakened me. He awakened the part of me he never knew existed, the part that remembers every sacrifice, every humiliation, every cold night working for his future. He awakened the part of me that would one day take everything back, in silence, with precision, with a revenge he would never see coming. The night it happened began like any other, quiet, heavy, and cold. I had spent hours outside fixing a loose fence panel, the kind of work that gnaws at the spine and stiffens the fingers. My joints ached, my back throbbed, and the only comfort I longed for was a hot shower, a small mercy after a lifetime of giving everything to everyone but myself. I didn't think I needed permission. I didn't think I was breaking a rule. I didn't think a father required approval to wash away the pain of years. Halfway through the shower, as the steam fogged the mirror and the warmth soothed my tired bones, I heard a knock on the door. A sharp, irritated knock. At first, I thought he needed something. But the knock turned into pounding, angry, impatient, aggressive. His voice cut through the running water like a blade. "How long are you going to be in there? You're wasting all the hot water." I froze. I tried to answer calmly, telling him I was almost done. My voice was steady, tired, worn out from a lifetime of hardship. But his voice came back harsher, louder, filled with a contempt that stung deeper than the cold tiles under my feet. You think I made him money? You never respect anyone in this house. Respect. The word twisted something inside me. After everything I had given, I was the one who didn't respect him. Before I could say another word, I heard it, the distinct, final click of a lock from the outside. A sound that didn't belong in a family home. A sound that didn't belong between a father and a son. A sound that would replay in my mind for the rest of my life. He had locked me in. For a moment, I just stood there beneath the stream of water, unsure if my ears had deceived me. But the truth settled quickly, brutally. When I tried the handle, it didn't move. He wasn't joking. He wasn't angry in passing. He was serious. Open the door, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Silence. I banged on the door, the steam around me fading into a sharp, unforgiving chill. My towel grew cold against my skin. The shower ran out of heat, turning into a miserable drizzle. Still no response. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk away, slowly, deliberately. And with every step he took, a small piece of the man I thought he was crumbled. Minutes passed, then hours. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, wrapped in a towel that felt like ice against my skin. I waited for him to come back, to realize this had gone too far, to unlock the door and apologize. But the apology never came. Instead, from the other side of the door, I heard something else, laughter. His laughter. His wife's giggles blending with his voice. Plates clinking. The hum of the TV. While I sat shivering on the bathroom floor, trapped like an animal, they were watching a show, eating dinner, living comfortably. I was locked away in the smallest room of the house I bought. The house I gifted him. The house I worked my life for. That night, I didn't sleep. No one could have. The bathroom floor was cold, hard, unforgiving. Every time the exhaustion pulled my eyes shut, the ache in my lower back or the metal taste of hunger pulled them open again. By morning, my head pounded. My throat was dry. My stomach twisted painfully. I drank water from the sink just to keep my body from shutting down completely. Each swallow burned like shame. I told myself that when he calmed down, he would open the door. But when the second day began, I realized something horrifying. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a punishment. This wasn't a lesson. This was control. He passed by the door several times, and I could hear the faint jingle of keys. Sometimes he would stop right outside, linger for a heartbeat, then walk away. He was letting me know he had the power. He was letting me feel the humiliation. He was letting me understand my place in the house he thought belonged to him. The stale air inside the bathroom grew heavy. I couldn't tell whether it was day or night unless I listened carefully for the sound of the refrigerator or the muffled voices outside. Time became meaningless, a cycle of discomfort and silence. At one point, I wondered if they had forgotten about me. But then I'd hear the creak of the couch, a door shutting, the clatter of dishes. They hadn't forgotten. They just didn't care. The laughter hurt the most. My own flesh and blood, laughing while I starved. The boy I carried on my shoulders, ignoring my cries. The child I protected from every shadow, treating me like unwanted weight. Hunger gnawed at me. My limbs trembled. My thoughts grew foggy. I paced the tiny space just to keep my legs from going numb. Every minute felt like a drop of poison seeping into my heart. And in those hours, I revisited every sacrifice I had ever made for him. The nights I stayed awake helping him with homework. The mornings I worked before dawn to put food on his plate. The years I gave him everything, so he would never feel the loneliness I once did. All of it, every sacrifice, was locked in that bathroom with me, suffocating me. By the end of the second day, my body was weak, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. That was the moment the anger arrived. Not wild, not loud, but cold. A kind of anger that moves silently, like a shadow sliding across the floor. A father's breaking point is not an explosion. It is a quiet, irreversible shift. I realized something brutally simple. I was no longer a father in his eyes. I was an inconvenience, a burden, a leftover. And in that realization, something inside me hardened completely. On the morning of the third day, without warning, the lock clicked open. The door swung slightly, and he muttered, without looking at me, "Don't waste water again." That was it. No apology. No regret. Nothing human. I stepped out, my legs shaking beneath me, but my face calm. Too calm. He didn't notice the change in me. He didn't see that something had been severed. He didn't understand that a bond once broken like this cannot be repaired. I walked past him in silence. I didn't give him the satisfaction of words. Words would have been for people who mattered. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. And in that fragile, trembling stillness, one truth filled my chest. He had locked me in a bathroom for 2 days. But he had unlocked something far more dangerous inside me. A part of me he had never met. A part of me that would stop living for him and start living for myself. A part of me that would reclaim everything he thought was his. I didn't know exactly how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This house, the roof he slept under, the walls he decorated, the floors he walked on, belonged to me. And very soon, it wouldn't belong to him anymore. When I walked out of that bathroom, I left something behind on that cold tile floor. My patience, my excuses, my hope that my son might one day return to the man I raised. Something inside me had snapped in silence, like a rope pulled too tight for too many years. And what rose in its place was not rage, but clarity. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always arrive like fire. Sometimes it comes like frost, slow, quiet, and deadly. I didn't confront him. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an apology. A man who locks his father away for 2 days doesn't deserve the dignity of conversation. So I played a different game, a silent one. For the next few days, I moved through the house the same way I always had. Soft steps, quiet breath, careful presence. I gave him polite answers. I nodded when he spoke. I acted like the same old man he thought he had controlled. But inside me, a plan had already started writing itself. Late at night, while the house sank into silence and their laughter finally died, I sat at the small desk in my room with nothing but a pen, paper, and the steady thrum of my heartbeat. One line, one truth, one weapon. The house is mine, not his, not theirs, mine. When I bought this house, I kept the deed in my name, not because I expected betrayal, but because, after losing my wife, I started protecting everything that mattered. I never meant it as a trap. I never thought I'd use it. But life has a way of reshaping the meaning of our choices. That deed had been buried in my safe for years. It was time to open that safe. I waited until one night when they were asleep, my son snoring loudly in his room, his wife scrolling her phone until her screen dimmed. I slipped into the garage, quietly, opened the old metal toolbox, and pulled out a small container of screws. Beneath those screws lay a tiny, aging key, the safe key, the one I had placed there years ago and had almost forgotten about. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something colder, sharper, purpose. Back in my room, I opened the safe. There it was, the deed, my name, bold, clear, untouched. I ran my thumb across the paper slowly, almost lovingly. This house, I whispered to myself, was always mine. A smile crept onto my face. Not a happy smile, but the kind of man wears when the world finally stops pushing him, when he stands up straight after being bent for too long. But I didn't rush. Revenge done in haste is loud and sloppy. I needed silence, precision, patience. So I began gathering information, quietly, methodically, the way a man collects tools before building something new. I confirmed the legal details with my lawyer, a man who had seen enough broken families to understand the gravity of silence. When I slid the deed across his desk, he looked at me with a long, searching stare. He doesn't know, does he? No, I said. My voice didn't waver. Then you hold all the cards. And I did. We planned everything with clinical precision. A private cash sale. No listings. No signboards. No public record until the ink dried. A quiet transfer of ownership that my son would never see coming. He thought he controlled me. He had no idea I was holding something far more powerful than fear. I found a buyer quickly. Young couple, eager, financially ready, willing to move immediately. My lawyer arranged everything. Documents were drafted, timelines fixed. My signature would be the final stroke that would end my son's world. Back home, I wore my mask well. I still made tea at the same time every morning. Still ate quietly at the corner of the kitchen table. Still nodded politely when he asked me to use less hot water or stop wasting electricity, as if those words didn't echo with the memory of being locked away. He thought I had moved on. He thought he'd broken me. He thought silence meant defeat. But silence was my armor. Every night, behind my closed door, I made my preparations. I tucked old photographs into a small drawer. I packed a few shirts into my suitcase inch by inch. I checked my passport. I planned my escape to a coastal town far from the place where my heart had been bruised. A single suitcase would be all I would take. The rest, the furniture, the memories, the life, could rot with the walls he no longer deserved. On one of those nights, as I listened to the distant hum of the refrigerator, I thought again about the bathroom, the cold floor, the bitter metal taste of the sink water, the muffled laughter. And every time those memories surfaced, the plan sharpened further. Revenge needed no anger, only certainty. During the day, he continued his routine. He walked around the house like a king, giving orders, making rules, regulating my existence, as though he were the owner. Turn off the lights when you're done. Stop leaving your shoes by the door. Don't take long showers. He never once realized he was commanding a man who held his future in a single sheet of paper. At night, I signed the documents my lawyer prepared. Each signature felt like a closure to a chapter he had ruined. Each stroke of my pen carved the distance between us deeper. By the end of the week, the house was sold, signed, sealed, paid for. Every cent from the sale was wired into a new bank account in my name, an account he would never find. The money would be transferred abroad soon. My lawyer told me to leave quietly, without explanation, without a note, without closure. Disappear clean, he said. I understood exactly what he meant. People like my son don't deserve answers. They deserve absence. Meanwhile, my son kept making plans for the house, plans for walls he didn't own, rooms he would soon be evicted from, dreams built on a foundation that didn't belong to him. One evening, a week before the sale finalized, he sat on the couch with his wife talking about remodeling. We'll knock this wall down next year, he said. I sipped my tea, hiding a smile. You won't even own this wall next month, I thought. The night before my departure, I took one last walk through the house while everyone slept. I ran my fingers along the walls I had painted years ago. I touched the table where my son once did his homework. I stood in the doorway of the room where my wife once lay beside me, not out of nostalgia, but because I wanted to remember exactly what I was taking from him. All the memories, all the comfort, all the safety, all the certainty. I returned to my room, closed the door, packed my suitcase, tucked the deed away. It no longer mattered. It had done its job. The final morning came quietly. Before dawn, I placed the house keys into an envelope addressed to my lawyer. My suitcase stood by the bedroom door. I looked around one last time, not with sadness, not with regret, but with a steady, bone-deep peace. The house was no longer mine, and soon it would no longer be his. I walked through the quiet hallway. My son was snoring softly in his room. I paused for a brief moment outside his door, not to think, not to feel, but to acknowledge the truth. This was the last time I would stand on this side of the door. The last morning I would breathe the same air as him. The last moment he would have a father under his roof. And he didn't even know it. I walked to the front door, opened it slowly. The morning air was cold, but it tasted like freedom. A taxi waited down the street, engine humming softly. The driver looked up as I approached and nodded. I placed my suitcase in the trunk without a backward glance. I closed the door to the house, quietly, gently, the same way I had closed the door to my son in my heart. Then I walked toward the taxi, leaving behind the walls that once held my life, my joy, and finally, my suffering. He had locked me away for using too much hot water. Now, without a word, I was about to take his entire world away. With silence, with precision, with a revenge he would never see coming until it was already done. The morning I left, the sky was a soft, pale gray, the kind of light that blurs the edges of everything. It felt fitting. My departure wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a shadow slipping out before dawn. A life leaving a place where it had already died long ago. The taxi ride to the bus station felt surreal. The driver hummed along to an old song on the radio while I stared out the window, watching the neighborhood pass by. The same streets where I once walked hand in hand with my son. The same roads I used to rush through after long shifts just to make it home in time to cook him dinner. The same corner store where he'd tug my shirt and beg for candy. Now I was leaving it all behind. And strangely, I felt light. The sale was done. The house was legally transferred. My lawyer held the keys. My suitcase held my future. And my son held nothing. Not yet. Not consciously, but fate was already closing in on him. I boarded the bus quietly, sat by the window, and let my mind drift. There was no guilt, no second-guessing. Sometimes, justice comes disguised as departure. Sometimes the most painful revenge is simply letting someone face the consequences of their own cruelty. As the bus pulled away from the city, my phone buzzed once. It was my lawyer. They arrived this afternoon. The message read, "The new owners will take possession by evening." I replied with a simple, "Understood." No flourish, no ceremony, no goodbye. A father's final act of love had once been giving his son a home. A father's final act of self-respect was taking it back. I turned off my phone and closed my eyes. By noon, I was in another city. By evening, another bus took me farther, toward the coastal town I'd chosen, toward open air, toward the whisper of waves instead of the suffocating silence of a house filled with resentment. While my journey carried me forward, my son's world was marching toward a collapse he never imagined. And it all began with a knock. That afternoon, around 3 p.m., the new owners arrived at the house, papers in hand, excitement on their faces. They rang the doorbell once, twice, 3 times. My son's wife opened the door with a confused smile. "Yes, can I help you?" The couple exchanged glances before the man spoke. "We're here to move in." Her smile froze. "Move in? Into what?" "Into our house," the woman said gently. "This one." My son walked into the hallway, irritation already forming on his face, the same irritation he used to direct at me. He approached the door as if he owned every brick behind him. "This house." No, there must be a mistake," he said. "This house belongs to me." The new owners exchanged another look, this time with a hint of discomfort. "I'm sorry," the man replied, "but we bought this property. The sale was finalized last week. It's legally ours now." My son's voice grew louder. "From who?" "From your father." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air. It fills the lungs, the bones, the entire world. His wife looked at him in shock. "Your father sold the house. To them." "He can't do that." My son snapped, frustration bleeding into fear. "He gave his house to me." "He didn't," the woman said gently. "The deed was in his name. We verified everything." Behind his anger, a flicker of something new appeared. Panic. Real, suffocating panic. Because in that moment, he realized something he had never bothered to check. He had never owned the house. He had always been living on borrowed grace. And grace has a limit. My son tried to call me. Again, and again, and again. He didn't know that I had already powered off my phone and placed it at the bottom of my bag. He didn't know that his messages were bouncing into a digital void. He didn't know that the father he had once imprisoned had finally walked away from the prison of his presence. As the new owner stepped inside, his voice cracked. "Wait, please, just wait. I need to talk to him." But they weren't there to negotiate. They had a legal right to the house. And they had movers. And money. And a contract stronger than blood. Stronger than entitlement. My son watched helplessly as strangers walked through hallways he once considered his own. As they examined rooms. As they opened doors. As they measured windows. He felt the walls closing in, not physically, but emotionally, the same way I had felt trapped in that bathroom. Except this time, it was his turn to feel powerless. His turn to feel displaced. His turn to face a lock he couldn't open. Life has a way of returning lessons with interest. Within an hour, his voice grew desperate. He tried calling his friends, his boss, anyone, but no one could undo a signed deed. By evening, he was forced to pack his bags. The house was no longer his. Not legally, not morally, not at all. He had treated me like an inconvenience in a home I built. Now life had turned that home into a place where he no longer belonged. The door shut behind him for the last time, and the world I had given him was gone. Meanwhile, I arrived at my new home, a small room in a modest house near the sea. The landlady, a soft-spoken widow, showed me the space she had prepared. It wasn't large, it wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful, and peace was something I had been starved of far longer than food. That night, I walked to the shore. The wind brushed against my face, carrying the smell of salt and open water. Waves crashed rhythmically, each one erasing something: pain, anger, exhaustion. For the first time in decades, I breathed without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations collapsing my chest. I sat on a smooth rock and watched the horizon. Did I think about my son? Yes, but not with sadness, not with longing, not even with satisfaction. I thought about him the way one thinks of an old wound, something that once hurt deeply but no longer controlled the body. I thought about the bathroom. I thought about the lock. I thought about the silence. And I realized something painful but liberating. He had treated me like a burden. He had locked me away. He had forgotten everything I had given. And now, life had answered. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with a single, irrevocable truth. You cannot imprison the person who built the walls around you. I stood there for a long time, watching the waves erase footprints along the shore. Then I whispered into the wind, I forgive myself for staying so long where I was not respected. Not him. Never him. My forgiveness was my own freedom. When the night grew colder, I turned back toward my new home. A life awaited me. Quiet, simple mine. And the house he believed he owned? It was already someone else's story. Just like he was no longer a part of mine. In the end, I didn't destroy him. I didn't raise my voice, or break his things, or leave scars he could point to. I simply walked away, and took back the world he thought he controlled. Sometimes revenge isn't fire. It isn't rage. It isn't violence. Sometimes revenge is a door quietly closing behind you, and never opening again. He once locked me in a bathroom to remind me of my place. But life reminded him of his. A man who forgets where he came from will one day lose everything built for him. I didn't win. I didn't triumph. I didn't celebrate. I just survived him. And now, in a small room by the sea, with nothing but the sound of waves and my own heartbeat, I finally understand something I should have learned years ago. The greatest freedom in the world is leaving behind the people who treat your love like a burden. And the deepest justice is letting them live with the emptiness they created. This was not my revenge. This was my release.